Excited to have you on 50 Chairs today. And I know that I've been able to share kind of the 50 Chairs story with you on numerous occasions, but excited to kind of finally have you inside of the podcast studio to talk about kind of your 50 chair moments. Um, but I want to start with I know you have like a mile long list of accomplishments from exits of companies to some of the generosity through the work you do at the university to starting being on the founding team at the Nault Center to a beer company. You name it, you have been involved in all kinds of things. But I want to start with a scene because I think, a lot of founders will get to a point or they think that the top of the mountain looks a certain way. And you've been to the top of that mountain. So I want to kind of take the audience there real quick because at some point you had built an amazing company and you sold it. And I just want to kind of walk through that. What surprised you most after you sold the company?
Well, haven't really thought about it that way before, but I appreciate it. And by the way, the 50 chair story, when you told me that, that took me to a whole nother level of understanding of what makes you tick. So I never met your father, but I appreciate the fact that he was so inspirational to you. So if your listeners have not directly heard that yet, go back to whatever episode you repeated it and make sure they listen to that. So what was it that day like? It was one of elation. Anyone who's done a fairly sizable exit knows that it was preceded by, gosh, probably maybe 18 months of planning and due diligence. Certainly in the last 6 months, you know, if I can go PG on this podcast, I joked about it. It was kind of like a proctological exam in how much due diligence gets done about your company. I sold to private equity, so they've got professionals who really, really dig in. And so there was probably a significant amount of relief and celebration that the day had come. My wife and I sat in our our banker's office because it's just this huge transition of wires going back and forth and bigger dollars than I've ever seen in my life. And it was scary. And then after all had been done, you know how you used to have to send a wire. It's give me the account number verbally in all these verbal,
Hmm.
verification. And you do that a whole bunch of times to get everybody paid and all the money in the right places. And so it was a couple hours of that kind of thing in our banker's office. And then when it was done, we just kind of leaned back in the chair. And then some of the other colleagues at the bank came in with a big bottle of champagne and flowers. And it was a cool celebration. But I don't know. I went home that day not feeling much different than I did the day before, other than sheer exhaustion and huge smile on my face. And that's kind of what that day was. Probably the next 2 or 3 weeks were the most interesting or compelling. And that's probably the mountaintop thing that you're talking about is you think you're at the mountaintop, but it's a mountain range. And so you're at a peak and you can see far. But I did a proverbial, my wife and I have a farm up in Pennsylvania and we love going up there and it's a front porch with rocking chairs. I'm not kidding. It's exactly like they tell you in the storybook. And we rocked on that porch. I personally rocked a lot. And it took
Wow.
probably, I don't know, a week before I'm like, what am I going to do now? I can't rock much more. I'm getting tired of this already. And so this sort of soul searching on what was next was probably the prevailing emotion, I think. Again, it wasn't on day one, but it certainly was on day 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that. So that's kind of what I would share about that question.
Wow. So as you're, imagining like, big moment and then the quietness of the rocking chair, what are you thinking about when you're sitting looking out and just kind of reflecting back on, that journey, the people that were around you? I feel like sometimes in those quiet moments, which you don't get a lot while you're building a company, I'll just say, but in some of those quiet moments, you get a chance to, sometimes God speaks to you, sometimes, something is in your mind. What was going through your head when you were sitting there just kind of rocking, thinking about all this?
Gratitude is probably the biggest thing. There were so many people that helped grow that company, so many just amazing team members over the 15 years or so that I was growing it. I set aside a lot of actually, I was the only shareholders. There was a slew of non-shareholders that now had to make a transition to a new boss, a new owner. And so I wanted to make sure that those folks knew my appreciation. So we set aside some money out of the proceeds of the sale and just hand wrote checks and thank you letters and things like that. So that's what I did a lot of after within the next few days after the close. But yeah, I mean, the gratitude is probably the big thing. That exploration of what's next. We knew that we wanted to stay active and do, now that you didn't have to work for a paycheck to feed the family, a lot of new things are open for you. And so we were able to make decisions that were greater risk. When it comes, I love entrepreneurship. I mean, so I'm never not going to do something that has to do with the startup. The thrill of the startup is my favorite part, and being involved in it somehow. And so we've since then I've had other companies that I've started and participated in, but I still don't have to run the day to day on anything, which is kind of a relief. Just relying heavily on those who are the operators. But we also really wanted to do a lot philanthropically, and we have this mantra that Eileen and I want to do our part to make the world a better place. So we're able to dive into things that are, certainly what I would consider nonprofit oriented and doing things within the areas that we believe we can do the most good. So that's what I'd say.
Seen that firsthand. I think our first encounter together was at Metropolitan Ministries, and then at some point we just kept running into each other at different events. So I've seen you walk the talk, as they say. Well, I want to kind of go to a different scene, and this is really, at the beginning. What did success look like for you growing up? You had you had the exit. You've done lots of stuff since then and along the way, but at the beginning, what was Andy thinking success was gonna look like for him?
And you've got some great questions. I guess, if you go way back, I just, in high school, I was fortunate enough to be a pretty good student. So I was, getting good grades. And somewhere along the line, an important teacher to me said, you can really go far with this, acumen that you have. And she said something like, right now you're ranked number one in your class, GPA wise. And so I went around, this was probably, I don't know, the beginning of my senior year in high school. I went around to all my teachers and said, look, I know, I can't remember what they call it, but it's a little warning to your parents if you're not going to make a passing grade. I can't remember what that little piece of paper is that they used to pass out in the 80s, but I said, Can you tell me if I'll track my grades and everything, but if there's any signal that you have that I'm not going to get an A plus in this class, please let me know, because my goal is to be trying to blank on what happens when you're the first person in
Victorian?
the Victorian. Yeah. See how long that goes? I probably wouldn't make it now if I can't even remember the name of it. Valedictorian of the class. And so that became my goal for that year, was just to continue on the straight A thing, and ended up being valedictorian, and had a chance to address my classmates at our graduation. And that was kind of cool. And then it just kind of continued. I just really appreciated being a good student. I appreciated the co-curricular activities that went on in university. And I got so engaged in student organizations and other things, and took leadership roles. And I believe, and it's kind of reflected in the paths that you and I cross now in the NALT Center, but I believe the non-classroom participation you have in a university, the process that you're going through, is as important as the actual textbooks and so forth. So student orgs and things like that are the things that I continue to beat the drum on, and it paid off greatly for me. It's the old adage about who you know, not what you know, got me my first job and then my second job. And, I haven't had too many roles before discovering the wonderful world of entrepreneurship. But to me, that was sort of what success looked like, is always climbing to strive for whatever the goal in front of me was.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's this conversation going on in kind of some of the work that I'm doing with Bloom about, how important are grades. And I just want to pause on that for a moment because, I've seen a trend in people that are successful. And it's not that the grade itself is the ultimate outcome, but the work ethic to want to get a good grade and that striving to willing to do whatever it takes. There is a through line of discipline and being able to accomplish something and kind of see that through. Do you think that that was kind of foundational for you in terms of like that set up a level of like, hey, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get to a objective that I see important in my life?
Totally, and I completely subscribe to what you just said about grades. It's not so much that's the answer, but it's equivalent to what you're doing with every other aspect of your life. That drive, that grit that it takes to accomplish what your goal is. And if your goal is to get an A in calculus, that's one thing. If your goal is to become president of student organization, that's another thing. And whatever it is that's in front of you, especially that time of life, that's the common thread. So I completely agree with what you're saying.
So how did that translate from, it said you had a couple of jobs that were non-entrepreneurial. You were working for another company. Was there an aspiration to be an entrepreneur? Like, was that a word that it was even kind of going, circulating in your head? 'Cause I know for me personally, it was not. It wasn't something that I strived for or even thought about, honestly. But I did find a problem that I, eventually was like, somebody's got to go solve this thing. What were those steps for you from like, hey, I'm working for somebody to, hey, there's something I got to go solve?
It's funny you say that because I never considered my entrepreneurship in my career.
Mm.
And I said that I answered a similar question years ago that someone asked me sort of like that. And my mother was there. This is 15 years ago. And my wife was there. And we were just chatting around, let's say the dining room table. I can't remember the exact setting, but I said that same thing. I said, I never really anticipated me being an entrepreneur as a part of my career. Always thought I would be part of a big corporation and climb a corporate ladder. And they reminded me of goofy little things I did. Obviously my mom witnessed things way young, like lawn mowing and selling this, that, or the other to, you know, creative things that are not necessarily starting and growing a business, but certainly the aspects of entrepreneurship that she called my attention to. I'm like, yeah, I didn't think of that. Then my wife is like, don't you remember when we were in college and we started that thing together and you were just so possessed of and I'm like, yeah, I guess I do have that seed in me somewhere to do things that involve taking risks and figuring out ways to fill gaps in the world. But yeah, no, I thought I was going to be a well, I went to school as to be an engineer, and I thought I was going to be a good technical engineering manager, and then maybe climb a corporate ladder, and who knows where that was going to take me. But my entrepreneurial story started, I would say, accidentally. I was in a chief information officer. I went to school for electrical engineering in the early '80s, and computers were just starting to be a household thing, and so my first career job was in what I would consider electrical engineering design and things like that. And I hated it, frankly. It was way too technical, way not involved with people. Like my head was down, designing things and doing things that I went to school for. And so I quickly decided that I needed to have an ejection seat to that side of the career. And I went back to school to get an MBA and then took a left turn using my electrical engineering technical base education to get into what now is called IT. And so I was an early corporate IT manager and then eventually chief information officer of a mid-size. This is probably my second stint as a CIO. Went to a mid-size manufacturing company and we bought a piece of software that was really obscure and not known at the time. It was pretty new. It was out of Europe. And so I had to train about 4,000 employees on this software, and it was new to the United States, and there was no training program to call upon. There was no experts that could come in and teach us what we needed to know about an ERP software. And so I kind of developed it ourselves, and then Microsoft ended up buying that piece of software. It's now called Dynamics. It's part of their enterprise software suite, but I was one of the early implementers in the United States. And so they invited me to sit on these stages and talk about how I was successful in the implementation. And I started talking about how we were able to develop this training program, which is now not that novel. Back then, it was a little bit more novel. It was essentially a train the trainer thing. So you were driving education through community. And I got so many phone calls and emails and, hey, tell me how you did that again. And so I found myself on nights and weekends developing this concept. I was calling it a user group. Basically, is we were, sharing information on how to get things done and having these training conferences and programs, and just knowledge sharing in general. And that just blossomed. And it came one day that I was working harder on nights and weekends than I was on my day job. So I quit the day job and went off and took my run at entrepreneurship. And first year was pretty lean. Had to pull the kids out of piano lessons and taekwondo, but it eventually kind of caught up to itself. And 15 years later, there was we were being sought after by private equity and other people looking to make that company their own.
Wow, what a journey, man. I wanna stop on something 'cause, maybe it's out of my own personal curiosity, but, a lot of times entrepreneurship, it affects your family, right? There's a moment where it's, you're taking some risk, and especially if you have kids in a family, they're coming along with you on that journey. Was there a moment where you kinda had to have, help them understand the why of what you were doing in that period of time, and how important was that?
I think so. In fact, I still have it hanging in my office. My oldest son, let's see, what year would have that been? Let's say he was in second or third grade. There was a little stint where I left. I had a big international company CIO job where I was gone all the time. And during that time, my kids were born and I was still on planes quite a bit. And I didn't like that. I wanted to be home with my family and be able to really participate with the upbringing of the family. And so had a little opportunity to join a few other friends of mine to start up a technical consulting firm, and jumped off to do that. And that was interesting. It was technical consulting. I still had to travel a little bit, but it was more local travel. But my son, who was probably the only one old enough to write at the time, I guess the school assignment was describe your dad's job. And it's really funny because, and it's, think of a second grader writing it, but the essence of it is he talks on the phone all day, and he sometimes he travels, but so it was a perfectly wonderful flavor of the glimpse of my life. I realized that I'm not a good consultant. I like to help people, and consultants, you help people, but you charge them for it. And so there's this weird thing in me that, I'm not a profitable consultant. Let's say that I spend way too much and too much time making sure that the people are successful. So it gave me an uneasy feeling. And so I went back to work for one of my clients as a chief information officer. But this time it was it was throughout the state of Florida, but I was home every night. So I told you all that to tell you that being with my family physically and mentally and emotionally is super important to me. When I started, the company's called Dynamic Communities. It was solely to be permissible to be a lifestyle company. In the beginning, that was my biggest goal. I wanted to be able to work out of my house or wherever I was, and do all this software training and community user group type programming from wherever my family was. And so, their impact was a little lean that first year. Everybody tightened their belt. They were young enough, and they were still having a good time, but I believe they liked having me around more than most dads. My wife's a teacher, just the most amazing hero that you'll ever meet. And but because of that, she had summers off. She taught exceptionalities in, I think she was probably in fifth grade, focused on fifth grade at the time, so elementary. And we bought an RV because she didn't have any place to be over the summers. And the kids were out of school. I had this job that let me do it from wherever. So the first few years of building that first company, Dynamic Communities, was done behind the wheel of an RV, traveling around. We would plan, my wife would build sort of curriculum. We would pick a part of the US that was full of, history and education opportunities. And so like we traveled to Boston and New England one time and focused on the Revolutionary War and things like that. And years later, when my son was going through AP US history, he's like, this is the easiest class in the world because I've been at all the places we're talking about in the book. So so I think my kids saw that it was, it was a virtue.
Mhm.
I don't think they ever knew much different because dads go to work and they come home and then they go to work the next day. And that wasn't the way their dad did it. The Probably a funny little aside. Now this is early 2000s. So I've got my cell phone, I got headsets, I got things like that that I can talk via Bluetooth and you didn't really have that back then. But so in order to get this ability to have, really uninterrupted, not like I'm doing right now with that little yappy dog barking in the background. I don't know if that's coming through the microphone, but it's there. But I bought a set of helicopter pilot noise canceling headphones, those huge ones,
Yeah.
and it had a boom mic, and it's what helicopter pilots use to talk to each other within the cockpit. And it had a connection, an aux connection to my cell phone, and that's how I did business the first few years. Dynamic Communities founded me behind the wheel of a 36-foot RV, traveling to some, national park somewhere, and conducting meetings hour after hour until we got there. And then we would throw out anchor and we would have family time. So that was a
Wow.
good portion of the first part of my life.
Wow. Andy, what an adventure for you and for your kids. I hope there is a picture somewhere of the headphones. I would love to see that.
We up, cell phones again weren't great back then. There wasn't even the concept of hotspots. So, I relied on email and getting online quite a bit too. So we would have to, about every 2 or 3 days, we would go to a legitimate campground that had Wi-Fi, and I would sit at a little picnic table and I would catch up on all the things I couldn't do from just the phone. And there are some fun pictures of me sitting with a different headset in the woods in a picnic table with my laptop in front of me, and that was the Dynamic Communities World Headquarters at the time.
I love it. I love that. I love that story. I think that, the takeaway that, I think the audience will appreciate is that I think the best way to integrate as an entrepreneur is not it's not about work-life balance. You hear a lot about this. I think it's work-life integration, right? And you've integrated, into that and what an amazing journey. So I want to talk about the company itself for a second because I know fast forward the story. I know some of the things that you've done post that around community, but I can also see the through line backwards to what you were building with dynamic communities. What did you learn in those early days about the power of community?
It's everything. I was doing a keynote speech at one of the community gatherings, and I wanted to come up with a real powerful statement. So I said something like, I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was the most powerful force in the universe is people coming together to solve problems together in community. And I truly believe that. I mean, you feel it. Think of your home team basketball game. They're playing the opponent, and you got screaming fans in the stands. And when those fans come to the aid of the players on the court, that community gets them to come to a different level of performance. My son went to Texas A&M, and they even call that group the 12th man because it's so impactful. That's the sports analogy for the same sort of thing. If you're alone trying to implement software and a few key people at your company are on a team, when you're surrounded by other people from other companies and other teams from other companies that are doing the same thing, you're in it together. And when you give of yourself and you know something someone else doesn't, but they know something you don't, and you share that, all of a sudden the 1 + 1 = 3. So I completely subscribe to the power of community, and I think that's the way that things get done.
And how did you grow from, I know it started off as like, hey, you were the main person, but it sounds like at some point this became its own thing. Became bigger than you, bigger than the piece of software. It became about the people, probably wanting to connect with each other just as much as they wanted to learn about the software.
Yeah, I really didn't do anything. Um, and I joked about that all the time. They came ultimately to have more success in implementing software. So I put it in the software training category, but ultimately, it was all about people to people, and I couldn't even tell you the first thing after the first few years when I wasn't in the software operator seat. I couldn't tell you anything about implementing that software, but what I could do is tell you, "Hey, I heard this story from this person. You should talk to them." And I became this connector and this convener of people who were trying to get the same thing accomplished, and it just grew and grew and grew to the point where, gosh, I think our high water mark, we had a big annual conference, and I think the high water mark was about 8,000 people that came into town. I don't even remember which town it was that we rented out the convention center, and huge undertaking to put on an event of that size. But you watch the magic happen in the little cafe tables in the corners and people standing in the hallways. You had experts teaching a class on what they knew and people attending, but the formal and informal education that was going on was just, it was magic.
Wow. Yeah, I've felt some of that magic at Synapse and some of the things and I want to kind of get to that part of the story because I think, as I've gotten to know you, at some point it feels like you stop focusing on building companies and you really started focusing in on building ecosystems, and particularly here in the Tampa Bay area. What was that? Why did you decide that that was the path? I mean, I'm assuming some of that came from the learnings, in building that dynamic communities. But what was that pivot for you?
Well, for me, I just believe in it and I know it works. The very specific way that Synapse happened, well, I should probably explain to your listeners what Synapse is. It's a Tampa Bay focused, really kind of Florida focused, because the ecosystem for what we were trying to build is bigger than Tampa Bay alone. But let's call Florida our footprint, but mostly Tampa Bay. In the years that it started getting formulated, let's say it was 2016, Tampa Bay was a good place to start a company, but not a great place. It wasn't renowned for it. And I was gearing up to exit my company, the Dynamic Communities company at that point, and I was, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on that process. And the co-founder, what became the co-founder and of Synapse, a guy named Mark Blumenthal, and I were sitting on my dock. I live on the water in Tampa Bay, and we were sitting there just kind of contemplating. He had recently exited another company, and we're like, why is it so hard to grow and exit a company in Tampa Bay? And we felt like the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go out there and put all these programs and organizations together to help entrepreneurs along the way. And so we said, yes, let's do it. We clinked our glasses and we went off, and that was our task. And as we dug into it, we're like, hang on, they're already here. No one knows about each other, and no one's paying attention to the macro of it all. There's no map to figure out where to find it. And so Synapse moved from, well, it wasn't even called Synapse at the time. It was just an idea, moved from creating programs to just making sure those programs knew each other. So our mission was creating valuable collisions among the key elements of the ecosystem. And that was written on plaques and on websites and things like that. And that's really all we did, is create opportunities for people to discover each other and help each other out. And that to me is the essence of what I learned the power of community to be through the last couple times that I built organizations that substantiate that. We tried a whole bunch of different things in Synapse. We had a yearbook like you would in high school. And I see those on the coffee tables of many cities that I go around still. It's called the Innovate. Then we tried a system that started smelling a lot like LinkedIn. But we spent a bunch of money on a platform. We're like, I think someone else with more money is doing this. So we stopped that. That wasn't overly successful. Tried a bunch of different things, but what really came out of it was this set of conferences where people were together face to face in under one building. It ultimately became called the Summit. And it was, we ended up doing it about once a year for a bunch of years. And again, the high water mark was 6,000 people. And it was great. And so that was how we felt like people discovered each other. And along the way, Tampa Bay started becoming known as a place rich with resources to start and grow a company. And I think it has, I mean, Synapse wasn't the only reason the needle was moved, but I think it has a lot to do with the light that was shown on all these different people working really, really hard to help founders and innovators get started.
Yeah, I would say that I think sometimes people underestimate what events like Synapse can do for a city. And obviously, you can point to South by Southwest in Austin and what that did for Austin. It's really amazing to have seen some of that growth. I haven't been here as long as you, but when people come in and see the Tampa Bay area, they're like, "Oh my goodness, you live here?" This is where you operate day to day. So I want to dig into a little bit of the challenges because I know a lot of the audience for this is in Tampa. And there's this growing access to, it used to be the barrier was access to capital. And that's really changing because to start a company today, it's probably never been an easier time to start a company with, software and Lovable and there's all of this innovation that's happening. But as you're looking at the ecosystem, you're part of the USF NALT Center, its inception, and that's becoming an important part of the ecosystem. The Synapse conference, you've got Embark and you've got Spark. I was just at Kathy Wood's Big Ideas Summit. What does this area need to do to go from where we're at today to that next level? What we're and you have a view and the people involved, these people. What would we have to do as a region to kind of get to that next level?
I don't know if I know that answer. I don't know what the next level is. I think it's going to need to be the next generation of community leaders that define what that is. And if you look at the I mean, everyone points to Silicon Valley as sort of the first to become the mecca for startup and growth, but there's other places around the country that have done so. And I don't know if we're listed in that short list, but we're certainly, I also don't know if there is the need for concentration anymore. The pandemic really taught us that you can do business anywhere with anyone. And so the need to be on Sand Hill Road and other places so you can drive next door to the private equity or the venture capital firm and things like that. They come to us now. You mentioned Embark as a great member of the ecosystem here in Tampa Bay. They have an annual, I think it might be semi-annual now, where they just bring venture capitalists and into town and have a couple days of programming, and it's really cool. So the fact that they're coming here seeking good things that are coming out of Tampa Bay is, I think, the answer to the capital availability. So I'm not going to try to solve that problem anymore. I think the biggest thing that I want to try to solve is inspiration, knowing that everybody who has that seed in them, that itch they want to scratch, can be an entrepreneur. It's not hard. Well, it is hard. It's very hard, but it's something. I was standing in front. I'll stop there and say this aside. I was standing in front of my class, and I was teaching undergrads for a while at the NALT Center for Entrepreneurship. And someone said, "What's the most important thing you need to know about entrepreneurship?" And I said, "I'm not sure I know exactly what it was, but I think you're born with it. I think it's more like a disease you're born with. And it's this disease that makes you look at the world and say, I'm not satisfied with where things are right now. I want to go fill a gap or change something or do it better than it's currently being done." So if I use the analogy of a disease that someone's born with and they just need to go, or an itch that you need to scratch, that's all it takes in my mind to be an entrepreneur. And the resources are out there. You can get coached. I just yesterday sat in a coffee shop with someone who said, and he's well into his career, and he's got this idea that's not even related to his career, and he wanted to know about he wanted to go back and get his master's in entrepreneurship so he could start a company. I'm like, that's great, and that will, jam you into a very good education on being an entrepreneur, but it doesn't, you don't have to go to a university to be an entrepreneur. You just need to be able to grab the resources that you need at the time to become educated to do it. So I didn't want to talk him out of going to USF to get his master's, because I believe a lot in that too, and so for some people formal education is the best way to feed the brain, but it doesn't, you don't have to have a master's in entrepreneurship to be a successful entrepreneur. And in fact, most don't, but it is a very handy way of kind of compartmentalizing and making sure that you hit all the things, especially at USF and the NALT Center, because the curricular parts are combined with the co-curricular parts. And so you get a chance to learn and also do.
I'm biased. I'll just say this up front, but having seen the work that the NALT Center is doing, and the students that come through there, and the Thrive competition that you put on, and the rain competition that Gil has sponsored with Steve Osher. I can say that there's probably no better place to be surrounded by great entrepreneurs than at the USF Knowledge Center. Again, for the audience, I'm biased. I know Andy, I know the team there, and Alan, but just having been in that community, I can tell you, if you want a great resource, the Knowledge Center would be a good place to go check it out. And you don't have to be always a student. There's events, there's speakers that come through that program. So, Andy, I want to kind of, on that note, as you're working with this younger generation, what are the big problems that you see them solving as they're going through this? And I'll just preface this with, I heard this stat from a guest on the show. 2/3 of Americans have an idea. So they did a survey. 2/3 of Americans have an idea that they want to go solve. So we have no shortage of ideas in our country, but only 2% actually show up at these innovation centers, right? We've built tons of infrastructure to support entrepreneurship in these major hubs. And we have a lot of Americans that have ideas, but not all of them are executing on them. But I don't see the same at the Knowledge Center. Obviously, that's people that are already kind of pre-subscribed to that. But what's the biggest thing that someone, as you're talking to students, that they could do today to kind of get moving on an idea they might be sitting on, like that guy in the coffee shop?
Nike grabbed the moniker before I could, but it's just do it. You got an idea, and you got to test the idea. One of the first places we point people to when they think they have an idea, but it's not really been socialized. And there's a program called ICORE at the University of South Florida. It's actually everywhere. It's a federal program, but USF and the NALT Center subscribe to it too. And I think it's about a 6 or 8 week program where you meet weekly, but all you're focusing on is vetting your idea with the public, and you're identifying potential customers and non-potential customers, and just kind of throwing past it. So there is a process, and this is what you learn either very concisely through an education like the NALT Center Masters in entrepreneurship, or by accident by just going out and doing it. But you learn to go through the process to see if there's something there. And it doesn't have to be a full-time job either. I always say, if you're an entrepreneur who's in a corporate seat, as long as you're doing what the person paying your paycheck wants you to do, the side hustle is the way to do it. You try, you get your feet wet, you work a little harder, you work a few hours at night, and work all Saturday and take Sunday off, and do whatever's right for you and your family. But there's no reason to say, today I'm going to be an entrepreneur. You can ease into it and just try things, and then you'll figure out if what you're thinking can hold water and eventually sustain yourself and a company.
Yeah, well, we'll steal Nike's moniker. Just do it. Don't sit on it. Go try it out. I think the biggest regret will be not having explored that idea and finding out if it could have been the next thing. So, Andy, two questions for you, because I know you mentor people along the way, and we're getting close on our time. But How important has I know you're a great mentor to lots of people in the Tampa Bay community, but who were the mentors in your life, and how important were those mentors as you were kind of building?
Well, the first two obviously were my mom and my dad. My mom, who's not with us anymore, is she showed me what it's like to have the right kind of heart and the right spirit. And so I look back to her and pay homage to her all the time about she was just such a caring person. So she's built a lot of that in my brother and I. And then my dad, who was like your dad, was a minister, and so very early on, I was exposed. I didn't know every kid wasn't exposed to all this because it's all I knew to social issues and to things that spirituality lead you to, where you're helping other people. And I remember being a young kid, and it was during the civil rights movement. I was born during the civil rights movement. So, when I was old enough to participate, I was in some march somewhere, and my dad took my brother and I and my mom, and we're walking with people down a city street with a lot of people supporting us, a lot of people yelling at us. And I was so confused. I didn't understand why that was, but I look back on that and realize the gravity in hindsight, what was going on at that time, just right after the death of Martin Luther King and things like that. So that's a heavy one to start with, but man, talk about building solid structure in a young person, so that when you grow up, you have a base that you don't veer too far from. I've had other mentors, a lot of peers, a lot of people younger than me that have mentored me along the way. I point to a guy named John Brules, who I met in my final corporate job. He was the president of the company, and uh, he retired right about the time that I left the company to put my full effort into dynamic communities. And he was with me the whole way, and he was a real business guy. And I'd say that's the first time I had the Jiminy Cricket sitting on my shoulder, whispering in my ear, "Are you sure you want to do that? Have you thought about this?" And so I look to him as one of my modern day business mentors. But yeah, the list goes on and on and on. And you find them in the strangest places too. And you don't have to be part of a mentoring program. That person doesn't have to subscribe to it. You find them in chunks. So if there's a mentor that you need in an area of your life that doesn't know anything about the other parts of your life, that's okay. It's good to feed off of and help the different aspects that round you out. So I could start naming a bunch of names because I have so many, but I dare not do that.
Yeah, understood, understood. Well, I think the power of mentorship is goes back to that community piece, right? So there's large community, and then there's that intimate community, and I feel like mentors really serve that role in your life. So, audience, find a mentor. Whether that's at a university or one of these centers, or maybe in a coffee shop, and you didn't even know that was going to happen. I agree with you. It happens in the strangest of places. Last question for you, Andy. What's next for you? I know you've got a couple things brewing, literally in some cases. What's next for Andy?
Yeah, you're obviously referring to the beverage company that I invested in. I'm never going to be done being part of entrepreneurial startups. It's so thrilling. It is kind of nice that I can come in and be advisory and investment oriented and don't have to wake up every day and do the hard work anymore. But there's probably three things that I spend that are formal companies that I'm in that role with right now. One is DCE Productions. That's the one that I started with a co-founder, a good friend, to really augment what I was trying to accomplish with dynamic communities. They do corporate event production and other types of things. And when we were putting on all those training conferences, I realized how mediocre the industry was. And so I just needed a higher level of service and professionalism. And so we started our own company. And now that company has about 600 clients, and I'm thrilled to watch it grow. A good friend of mine wanted me to look at a business plan. He was like a hobbyist when it came to brewing beer, craft beer. And I know him through different walks of life. Our wives knew each other, and he said, "Look at this business plan." And it was a business plan that was going to start this entertainment complex in in an area in Pinellas County, Pinellas Park specifically. That's I drive through it every time I head to our little beach condo, and it's kind of a desert for things to do there. And so it's this cool economic development and I'd say city revitalization plan that the city has. And he put in this proposal to create this entertainment complex that has a market hall and a concert venue. And then he would put the beverage manufacturing there. So Masteries, it started out as Masteries Brewing Company, and now the project is called Park Junction. And we're getting ready to break ground on that, just finalizing financing and things like that. And then another good friend of mine jumped on the AI train and asked me to look at his business plan. And I'm like, this is phenomenal. Let me invest in you too. So just yesterday we were having our session together. So and that my son has a company, and I love being part of watching founders and operators do their thing. So I'm going to lend my efforts there. But the big thing I'm working on too is to use the formula and the playbook that we did with dynamic communities, where we're helping enterprises accomplish their systems goals, and then what we did with Synapse, where we were using community to drive moving the needle on startup and innovation in Tampa Bay. My next goal is here, and I don't know how much time we have left, but I'll give you the 2-minute version.
Yeah.
There's this thing at in Tampa Bay that the Tampa Bay Partnership, USF, the United Way, and the Community Foundation Tampa Bay host every year to analyze key metrics around sort of the condition of living in Tampa Bay. And we rank ourselves against 19 other metro areas we consider peer groups. So think Seattle, Charlotte, cities about the size of Tampa Bay, as opposed to, say, Chicago, New York, LA. And those are not our peers. And we're always kind of not on top of the heap. And that drives me crazy. And it's societal challenges like economic mobility, early childhood education, things that are very changeable. And so my next big effort is going to be utilizing the power of a lot of people who are already working on those types of things to take on Tampa Bay's biggest societal challenges and use the same form of power and community by finding ways for people to collaborate together. We have no less than, I don't know, 50 different groups, nonprofits and government agencies and corporations who prioritize, let's say, feeding the hungry.
Mhm.
And a lot of times those people they don't know each other exist. Some of them are paddling one way, the others paddling at the opposite way. And so I believe, using the examples of Synapse and dynamic communities, that we're better together. And if we can use that opportunity to create those valuable collisions, so making the introductions and creating opportunities for people to collaborate, I think we can move the needle on some of these problems. And so that the next, state of the region report, we'll watch those rankings go up relative to our peers. And so that's where I'm going to pour a lot of energy over the next few years.
That's a big and ambitious goal. I was at that State of the Community at the invitation of both you and your wife, and I saw that. It bothered me too. So excited to know that you're tackling that challenge. That is a worthy goal. Well, Andy, I want to say thank you for just your friendship, your leadership in this community, for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom and stories that hopefully inspire people that are in the middle of their building or thinking about building, to see, not only what success can look like, but also the stewardship of that over time. And no, you're not stopping. You're not done yet. Keep going. So excited. Where can people find you if they want to find more info or just chat with you?
I'm not a big LinkedIn or social media person, but I will pay attention to that over the next few weeks in case that's the best way to get a hold of me. But you can find me on LinkedIn, and Dr. Andy Hafer is my what you should search for out there in Tampa Bay. I don't know if there's more than one out there, but the title of on my LinkedIn profile is Dr. Andy Hafer. And yeah, I'll start doing a better job of paying attention.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thank you, Gary.